Okay, so can we bring up the next talk then? This is from Ellen Coates. And so Ellen, and with your partner, with your colleague, James Baker there from,
Welcome, and thank you for attending our talk. Thanks also to the Mechanics Institute's Worldwide Conference for the opportunity to present here. We'd like to begin by acknowledging that this presentation was created on the lands of the Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. The two institutes we work for and talk about in the presentation are also on Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung land. We'd like to acknowledge the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains, on whose land the zine we created was first presented and distributed. We pay our respects to the elders of these peoples, past and present, and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. So I'm James. I've been a librarian at the Melbourne Athenaeum Library for almost 8 years. My primary role is cataloguing, but as with most small libraries, there are many other elements to my role, including website and social media management and comic and graphic novel acquisitions. I'm also an educator in the Diploma of Library and Information Services course at Swinburne University of Technology, and I'm one of the co-conveners of ALIA Vic and the secretary of ALIA Graphic Novels and Comics, both groups within the Australian Library and Information Association, ALIA.
Hi, I'm Ellen. I'm the Collections Librarian and Volunteer Coordinator at the Prahran Mechanics Institute Victorian History Library, PMI. I've been there for just over 5 years, and I'm additionally a casual academic at Charles Sturt University. I'm also the other one of ALIA Vic's co-conveners, and in my spare time, I'm an historian and writer and run the blog Historical Ragbag. You can find me on Twitter at BiblioL. In 2019, James and I gave a presentation to the New Librarians Symposium in Adelaide about our institutions and their libraries and how they have adapted to remain relevant over their history, but have stayed true to their original founding tenets. As part of this presentation, we created the zine, the front and back covers, which you can see on the screen now. We wanted to make the history tangible for our audience, and today, through the lens of this zine and zine culture more generally, we'll be exploring this tangibility and the adaptability of our institutions. To begin, we wanted to investigate that history. The PMI is the second oldest library in Melbourne, Victoria. It was founded in 1854 with the stated aims of providing for the mental and moral improvement and rational recreation of its members by means of lectures, discussion, library, reading room, classes, museum, philosophical apparatus, etc. The PMI has held true to these aims throughout the last 167 years, but its key point of difference came in the 1980s. Membership was declining, and it was decided that a new focus was needed to differentiate from public libraries. The committee at the time agreed to turn the collection to a specialisation in Victorian history. This collection has grown to more than 30,000 items and is the only loanable collection of its type anywhere in the world. The PMI is dedicated to preserving, protecting, and promoting the history of Victoria and ensuring that the multiplicity of voices that make up Victoria's story are represented in the collection.
Melbourne Athenaeum is the oldest library in Victoria and was founded in 1839 as the Melbourne Mechanics Institute. This was only 4 years after the foundation of the settlement in 1839. The name was changed to the Melbourne Athenaeum in the 1870s to differentiate it from the rapidly increasing number of other mechanics institutes in the area. The Melbourne Athenaeum has stayed true to its founding mission of the diffusion of literary, scientific, and other useful knowledge to members and the general public, which historically has included the operation of a library, museum, lecture space, and gallery. Currently, this is limited to the library and archives, but events are regularly held and artworks and archives displays exhibited in the library space. Today, the Melbourne Athenaeum aims to provide a similar experience to public libraries, although with a few significant differences. These differences include retaining entire series, being a quiet space in the heart of a busy city, and highly personal service. All things that public libraries with their larger user bases and broad program aims can struggle with. Many of the ideals underpinning zine culture align with those of mechanics institutes, such as independence, community, self-education, and self-guided discovery. However, whereas mechanics institutes are centered around buildings where the services and opportunities are provided, Zines co-opt the space where they are created, distributed, and read. And this distinction positions zines as a good complement for mechanics institutes. But before we can talk about this, we need to understand what zines are. Now, at their core, zines are professional and usually unofficial publications produced for a relatively small audience. Mostly, they are made by enthusiasts of a particular cultural phenomenon. This is a page from a zine created to help people make zines, and it states that anyone with a pen and an idea can make a zine. There are a number of core elements that zines tend to share, and some of them are listed here, but there are likely plenty of zines that don't follow one or more of these. By their very nature, zines are exceedingly difficult to define beyond quite broad definitions. Now, the idea of anyone being able to make a zine is best represented by these instructions on how to make an 8-page zine from a single piece of paper. All that is needed for this is a sheet of paper, something to write and draw on it with, and a pair of scissors for a single cut. Many libraries have a lot of success engaging users, and particularly younger users, with this at workshops. The creators can also use the library photocopier to create copies to share with their friends, further increasing awareness of the institution and its activities. Zines trace their origins back to the amateur press movements of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. These associations provided the opportunity for diverse and otherwise isolated groups of people to communicate, to discuss common interests, much like subreddits, e-lists, and online user groups today. Alongside this, in the 1930s, pulp science fiction magazine editors started publishing fan correspondence, including return addresses in the letter columns. From this, readers of the magazines were able to communicate directly with each other, bypassing the magazines entirely. And together, these factors allowed for the production of independent fanzines that could be distributed directly to other like-minded individuals. From these beginnings, zines expanded to cover other interests, including riot and punk music cultures, as well as social and political movements such as rock and punk music cultures, as well as the social and political riot girl. Each of these expanded the concept of what a zine could be, and in the last quarter of the 20th century, zines were starting to be considered an art in their own right, separate from the fan cultures they had been connected to. This meant that zine creators and readers, often called zinesters, started to be seen as part of their own distinct subculture.
This foundation has led to a thriving international zine culture. The simplicity of zines and their ease of production also enables minority voices to tell their stories without the hindrances that come with mainstream publication. This culture of community, independence, and discovery has found a home across the world, with zine festivals like the Festival of the Photocopy you can see on the screen, which is held in Melbourne each year, zine making workshops, and even zine shops. In Melbourne, Australia, there is an especially strong zine culture, including one of the only zine-specific shops and studio spaces in the world, the Sticky Institute. The Sticky Institute not only sells zines, but provides a safe space where they can be created. You can see it in the image on the right. The PMI's small zine collection, which you saw earlier, was sourced from here. The PMI sees zines as an important way of collecting minority voices to help tell the broader story of Victoria's history. Zines are embedded in the library culture in Melbourne too. There are librarians interested in both collecting and creating zines based out of Melbourne, including Cassie Grace, who makes the collaborative library zines under the moniker Rebel Glam. Both James and I have even contributed to some of these zines, which were distributed at conferences and events, as well as uploaded online as scanned versions of the physical zines. Zines are actively collected by the State Library of Victoria. So this all brings us back to our zine. As I alluded to earlier, we wanted to make something tangible that represented both our institutes, but also told their stories in a meaningful way. We deliberately only made a handful of the zines, and we individualised them with heritage stamps and embossing from both our institutes. This truly made each copy of the zine one of a kind, much like the institutes they represent. Presenting our histories in the zine gave the history more accessible and more engaging elements without reinforcing any potential preconceptions of the institutes as old-fashioned. It explored their history as well as the broader history of mechanics institutes, The zine also illuminated the program's innovations and lessons learned that the PMI and the Melbourne Athenaeum have utilised to remain relevant. The zine is an embodiment of the history of both the institutes, carrying their stories, stamps, and ideas for the future in a physical format. So both the Melbourne Athenaeum and the PMI are rooted in their heritage, but they recognise the need to take that history and use it to foster broader engagement through a variety of avenues.
The Melbourne Athenaeum doesn't have a specific focus on history in its offerings. So given the importance that the institution places on history, it has had to find innovative ways to include it. One of the ways is to have an ongoing annual lecture series called the Marcus Clarke Lectures, named for a novelist and journalist who was also a committee member of the institution in the 1870s. Another way was the institution's involvement in the Melbourne White Night Festival in 2015 with Lisa Anderson's Illuminate Athena 3, including aspects of the institution's history in the art projection, as you can see on the right. There are also more regular ways the Athenaeum encourages people to engage with its history, including talks and presentations, often in partnership with local events or community groups, and research inquiries to the archives. Sometimes these requests form the basis of archives displays in the library. So by applying these two strategies in tandem, the Athenaeum increases its reach to people who would otherwise be unaware of the remarkable history of this institution.
So the PMI does have a very specific focus on history. It began the process of specialisation in the 1980s by working with academics to collect a core of local history books. This collection has grown to represent all aspects of Victoria, including their own archive. You can see part of the 30,000 strong collection on the right. The PMI has moved beyond passively waiting for history to be written so they can collect it. They are actively collecting stories that might otherwise be lost. This ethos is highlighted in an ongoing project to seek the stories of all religious organisations and their buildings to ensure a multifaceted picture of Victoria's religious history is represented. This project has led to contacts with local Buddhist, Zoroastrian, Islamic groups and collecting works from these communities in their own words and languages. You can see some examples on the left. So the Melbourne Athenaeum and the PMI are both working with innovative engagement with their histories going forward. We're still in lockdown here in Melbourne, and I'm only on site 1 day a week. So we've been finding unusual ways to maintain engagement. The PMI is using our unofficial mascot, Clementine, a stuffed Highland cow, to keep people engaged with our ongoing activities and history during lockdown. You can see her dressed up with fashion books for the Brownlow Medal, the major AFL Award Night, and Spring Carnival on the left.
The Melbourne Athenaeum is currently investigating the possibility of an archives podcast to, again, increase the ability to educate and entertain people with its history. Currently, this is primarily achieved through the displays in the library, which doesn't reach people who are unable to come into the physical space. Because our institutions are continually finding new ways to engage, they increase the chances of continuing their long history into the future. And because we are finding innovative ways to engage as information professionals, we're giving ourselves strong foundations for professional and personal development. So, is a zine right for your institution? There are several factors to consider if you're thinking about creating a zine for your institution. It's important to consider if this particular method is the right way to encourage engagement with the history. Another consideration is whether to create one yourself to distribute, or whether to, as with the AusLib series, create a compilation zine. This could be done through an event at the Institute or online through requested submissions. There's not one way for an institution to engage with members or non-members. Adaptability and flexibility are at the heart of zine culture, and also the longevity of mechanics institutes.
So zines won't work for everyone. Just because they're physically simple doesn't mean they'll work for all institutions. But if you do decide you want to give it a go, then make sure you go in with some direction in mind. The key is to work out what audience you're trying to reach. This will determine whether a zine will work for you or not. Be clear about the theme of the zine, otherwise they can just become a jumble of ideas. Tie it back to your organisation or a specific program that you're already running. Then you can give the zine a solid grounding rather than just doing it for the sake of doing it. Work out if there can be a follow-up. Can you feed your zine back into the collection or the community you want to engage with? Essentially, as with most things, it comes down to have a plan. So what next? As we've said, find innovative ways to use the resources you already have to share your stories. And if zines are that way, we'll go forth and zine.
Thank you for listening to our presentation. We hope it was not only interesting, but has also inspired you to go out and engage with the culture and ideals of zines in the context of your own institutions. Oh, and if you do use zines in your institutions, please let us know. We'd love to hear about it.
Thank you.
That's great. I mean, I did not know what a zine was, and I feel like I've certainly had a lecture there. Sorry, my host is now asking me to turn the video on, so that's good. So there's a question. Sue's made the comment about the new chancellor talking about we need to build a generation of people with new technology. So perhaps zines are the new technology. Also, one of our panelists, or one of the audience, Tanya, says that it's fascinating to see zines still alive and well. I used to write for a punk zine 3 decades a year, so I'm not sure this is new technology, but no, that was a really inspirational talk to get us to go out and try something new. I feel I've missed out in life if I didn't know what a zine was. So are there any direct, Lauren is asking, there's a question from Lauren. I think you can see this in the chat, Ellen, so you might want to read it directly there.
No, it's not. Oh, hang on.
At
James is
2:32.
on as well if you want to let him. James
Yeah.
should be here too.
Yeah, well, Gavin will upgrade him. So the question, I'll read it.
Yeah.
Have you found it?
Yeah. We need to find it. Sorry, it's
Okay.
It's midnight here, so it's just trying to read things. Yeah, so basically zines can be produced by pretty much anybody. So that's the problem with zines, that they can have very broad definitions but also very narrow definitions. So yeah, I've seen zines produced by multiple authors. You can have compilation zines. They can cover multiple subjects as well, though they're often themed around one sort of broader subject to bring a bunch of people together. And then there are people that just like tell their life stories in zines as well. So pretty much the only real key commonality is their flexibility. And I will let James expand on that.
Yes. So usually a single zine will have a topic, but what that topic is as broad as the interests of the people creating them. And yeah, there've been some of the topics that we had in our presentation, but also there are zines about zine making now. There are zines about zine culture has become its own thing. So anything that people want to address as a subject is fair game for a zine. Yeah.
Okay, that's useful, and of course, that people on this call will know where to go for expertise, won't they, James? They can email you.
Welcome to contact us. Yeah.
Yeah.
Your emails in the back of the proceedings.
They are, yes. You can contact both of us on Twitter as well.
And you're very active on Twitter, I suspect, Ellen, because you yeah. And
yes,
I'm sorry
leading the conference.
Sorry to keep you up to midnight over there. So as I said,
That's
it was difficult to have. You know, we could have had an entire Australian morning, and then so I'm sorry about that.
That's okay.
Appreciate that, and I hope you found the whole thing interesting.